Okay, this is Kurt Edwards with AIST. I'm here at AISTech 2018 in Philadelphia on the 6th of May 2018 with Charlie Totten. Charlie, thanks for being with us.
Oh, you're welcome.
So, can you tell me a little bit about where you grew up?
I was born in Marengo, Indiana, and my father got a job in northern Indiana, so we moved up to South Bend, Indiana. And I spent all the way through high school there in South Bend. So, great place to live.
What did your parents do for a living?
Okay, my mother was a homemaker. She had 5 children. I'm the oldest of the group. And then my father was a truck driver. And he delivered a lot of Army trucks called 3-ways. You've seen them on the highway, a truck, and there's a couple of them stacked on the back. He did that for many years. He also, when I got out of the Army, he got me a job there on weekends. I worked in a steel mill, but he said, "Hey, you want to earn some extra money?" Because we had long weekends. And I said, "Sure." So I drove with him about 3 times, and I said, "That's it for me. I can't do it." Just so. But he knew every road in this country, and you say, "How do you get here?" He could tell you exactly the routes and everything. He was amazing. He had amazing memory for all these roads.
So what influenced you to become an engineer and get involved with the steel industry?
Well, let me clarify that. I'm not an engineer. I kind of wanted to be an engineer in the electrical department, but I had a lot of engineers that worked for me, and I did find once in a while I could find that they made a mistake, even though I'm not an engineer. I'm really more into supervision and management, although when I started my career at Bethlehem Steel, well, first of all, I was in the Army, and I was at Redstone Arsenal Electronics, and I worked on Hawk missiles. And so that missiles, electronics, when I got out and went into Bethlehem Steel as an electrical helper, an hourly position.
And did you start there right after you got out of the service?
Yes. Well, yeah, within a couple months. Burns Harbor, who is a crown jewel of the Bethlehem Steel plant, opened up in 64, 65. And when I got out of the Army and lived in South Bend, a friend of mine, who we went in the Army together, he said, "Hey, you just opened a steel plant. Let's go up there and see if we get a job." So that's how I got started. I went with him, and sure enough, we both got jobs.
When you first started there, what were your duties like, and what were your responsibilities?
When I first started, I was called an electrical helper, and that meant there's only 2 job classes there. Well, 2 called it motor inspectors or helpers. And what you do, I was the first guy in Burns, because it was all new, first guy to pass a craft test to be an A-rate motor inspector. That's how I started. I worked in a plate mill for about 8 months, so I learned a little bit about the plate mill operation. And then I went to the hot strip mill, and that's where I actually became the motor inspector, and then a supervisor.
And when you started at Burns Harbor, were there mentors or people that helped you out?
I could say that I have met some really classy people who were supervisions that mentored me my whole career. And in fact, I exchange Christmas cards now with a fellow here in Maryland who was, I still have in my briefcase at home. He was a general foreman when I was the foreman, and he mentored us the whole time. Mentored us how you work safely, how you documented things, how you made sure you double checked yourself, and just all those kind of things that developed me into the person I am.
Um, what were some of the biggest projects or challenges that you faced when, at least in the early part of your career?
Well, it was interesting as an hourly motor inspector, just because what you did was if there was a problem, then you had to respond to the problem. Cranes were one of the areas we took care of. So there was always funny little things to do on cranes. For instance, and I always thought this is funny, I got a call that there was a magnet problem on this crane. So my foreman called and said, hey, go take care of that. I went and took care of it, come back in the shop. And that's what we did. We would be back in the shop waiting for the next call. And he'd call me again, hey, Charlie, that crane, they got a magnet problem. Aren't you going to take care of it? I said, I just come back from that. And he says, well, it's got a problem again. So I figured out what was going on here. So I go back out there again. I took care of what it was. He was breaking them. And I told him, I'm going to sit down there below. As soon as he breaks again, you just call me. I'll be right there. And I sat there for a little while, and then I left because he was intentionally doing that. And it's just like something you learn that, okay, how do you deal with this? You know, it wasn't just fixing it. It was also, he's going to damage it if he knows you're right there to fix it quick. He wanted a break or something. I don't know. But you learn those kind of things after a while.
From your initial start at Bethlehem Steel and at Burns Harbor, how did your career progress? Like, what other departments, other jobs did you hold?
I started out, like I said, the motor inspector. And then, let me read some of these. After I passed the craft test, I went to exempt turn foreman. Then 3 years later, I was called the finishing in foreman. It's at the hot strip mill where they have 4 process lines. I was in charge of that. Then I got promoted to the assistant, called the assistant electrical foreman 2 years later. Then I was sent to the plate mill as the electrical foreman in charge of everything in the plate mill. Then I went to well, first of all, the way that worked is, in fact, it was kind of funny because whatever I was, as a supervisor, you do what you're asked to do, you know, and you try and do it the best you can. And one time, and the way it always worked at Bethlehem is they would say, Charlie, go over there tomorrow at 9 o'clock, be there. They didn't say why. They didn't say what's up or get prepared or nothing. And this time, when I went over and met with the superintendent and sat down, and there was like 3 of these other major supervisors around me. I thought, this is kind of odd for me to be on this side of the room and them on the other side. And they said, okay, we want you to go to the plate mill as in charge of the plate mill. And of course, I'm going to go. But then later on, afterwards, it was all done. I said, you know, it was probably the first time I probably could have said, I don't want to go. But of course, I would never do that, you know. So then when my senior supervisor, he was sent out to a different plant for about a year. I took over for him temporarily. Then it came back, and what kept adding on this is I'd get different jobs. Like I was in charge of crane repair, electrical foreman, and the plate mill, and then I went to crane repair. Then it was going through an area when steel mills were reducing supervisors, so they'd get rid of general foreman and say, Charlie, you got 2 departments, and then you got 3 departments, and that's just the way it was, you know. You just you get more responsibility, and I always did think, one thing I thought is, about the time I think I got a good handle on what I'm doing, they give you a new job, you know. So, but it was always fun. And then finally, I was made a permanent supervisor, senior supervisor, and then Bethlehem Steel went bankrupt. And of course, when new management comes in, the top people in the departments, they're all told goodbye. And so I ended up with the department, had 750 people in it, hourly, they had 49 supervisors, and so and then at that time I said, you know what, I'm going to retire too. So that's what I did after all these 14 different jobs.
But even after you retired, you continued working in the steel industry.
Yeah, in fact, when Bethlehem went bankrupt, we didn't know how the reorganization was going to happen. You know, one of the things that we thought about is there are a lot of companies out there that service cranes. And it's like probably the new owners would want to not have an employee process. You'd bring an outside company as contractors to operate the cranes. So we looked into that a little bit. I got during these interviews where we had crane companies come in, when we did go bankrupt, then one of them called me and said, "Hey, would you like to come and work here?" And I did. It was P&H Cranes. And P&H eventually, after a few years, was bought out by Konecranes, probably the largest crane company. And so during my job was called the National Accounts Manager for Integrated Mills. So I visited. There was like 11 major steel mills, and I visited all of them with my job, and basically be a salesman, sell them cranes or parts for cranes or service cranes. So, I mean, that was in 10 years of my career after Bethlehem. I was doing that. And then I decided after 10 years that I wanted to retire from that. My wife and I had relocated down south where I live now. And at that time, then I got a call from another company, T&M Equipment, said, "Hey, would you like to, you wouldn't have to travel as much, and you just take care of Southern Indiana and Kentucky." So I said, sure. So, and it worked my own schedule. You know, it's not really like 8 to 5 every day. I work whatever the schedule I want.
So backing up a little bit, you're known, at least in AIST, for your involvement in the crane committees. How did you first get involved with the cranes, and what was it about them that really caught your interest?
Well, I think what it was is probably when I got, like I said, I got assigned to crane repair, to be in charge of crane repair. And first of all, the biggest part of crane, I was electrical. Okay, my specialty was electrical. And now I'm in charge of cranes that the biggest thing they'd have to work on is mechanical. So I was a constant upgrading. I mean, I'm not an engineer, but what I did learn is you got to learn something every day. And when you're in an area of responsibility, you certainly want to make sure everything is safe. And so you got to know what you're talking about. So, and I also had some hourly people there who taught me so much. When I didn't understand how certain machines operated, there was particularly one millwright that he would work with me and explain to. We get the drawings. A lot of the work with the cranes was done with drawings. We had all the detailed drawings, and we'd go through it. So I have to learn all this stuff, and I enjoyed learning it and enjoyed solving problems. And eventually, the crane repair, the way it was organized, we were in charge of all the cranes in the plant for the mechanical stuff. So if somebody had a problem out in their mill, they would call us. We'd go take care of the problem. Or if there's a problem that isn't getting solved, we'd go there. And I've had many interesting projects where, like one of them in steel making. The millwrights there were putting cables back in sheaves. Sheaves are the sliding wheel up on the top of the cranes that lifts and lowers the blocks. And it was to a point that every turn they would get cables out of the sheaves. So I got asked, hey, they had one big long delay there. can you go out there and take a look at that, see what you can do? So I went out there and looked at it, and came back and sat down and started, how can I keep cables from coming out of shifts? We come up with a way of doing it and go back out there and say, okay, or actually we made it on a shift inside the shop. We called the management people in charge of cranes in that area, say, come on down and look what we got. They come down and says, that'll work. They'll do it. So, and we ended up putting that throughout the plant, that design. And actually, I wrote a paper on it. So.
And speaking of papers, can you talk about some of your technical contributions to the steel industry and cranes in general?
Yeah, let's see where I got a list of them here. I counted them up. Okay, there's my list of published papers. Well, and they all start up. One thing, just that whenever, like I said, you get involved in something like wheels, we worked on, when we eliminated more than 50% of the failures, that's kind of a noteworthy thing to do. The cables out of shifts, we fix it so it burns harder. We don't have that problem. And that was the goal all the time, is if you have the problem, you fix it. You don't just fix it on one. You fix it on wherever it's applicable. So wheels were one on the DC contactors on cranes. We called the company with Andrew Trexon and said, hey, we want solid state controls. And he designed them. We were a prototype plant for that. And I've written a paper on that about the solid state, why you want to go to solid state. Today, that drive is everywhere in the industry. But it was something that we started. So my goal always was, I don't repeat things. If we get on a project, you study it hard, make sure you get a solution that's going to be permanent, not temporary. Then you tell about it. Because the goal is, well, my real goal always has been, if I can pass this out to other people, other steel mills, what would happen in this country? Hopefully, we would become very competitive in the world, and hopefully there'll always be steel mill jobs in this country. And that's been one of my major goals, is to make sure that it happens if I can.
Now, in your career, have you received honors or awards that you're particularly proud of?
Many of them. So the AISTE and AIST have been really generous with me. I don't think I wrote down my awards, but the last one, Distinguished Member and Fellow Award. So I've had that, which was really been a wonderful thing for me to come here to the conventions, bring my granddaughter, who used to be my wife all the time, go out to the president's dinner, welcoming dinner, and at that dinner, almost always it's been a bunch of these young kids that make musical sounds, put on a performance for us, have a nice dinner, get to meet some friends year after year after year. So that's been, I guess, a major one. I also won the Gold Award for reliability when we did our work on the wheels after about 20 years of success there. I think there's been a couple more.
And for the steel industry, are there milestones that you think had the biggest impact in the industry?
Well, some of the comments about what we've done on safety, like fall protection. 15 years ago, nobody was thinking about falling off a crane or making safety precautions to prevent that. Today, that's just the way cranes are built, So it's like the safety part of it. It's also, when Technical Report number 6 was written, we put in there a lot of things called maintainability, so that when somebody works on it, it's easy to work on and it's safe to work on.
So, when did you first hear about AISE or AIST or AIME?
Okay. Well, when way back in, I guess might have been the 70s, this fellow who was on the crane committee came to Burns Harbor as a Burns Harbor engineer, and I worked with him as a crane representative on his work he was doing in steelmaking. And we had our project probably went on 6 months or so. And then at the end of that, we had several meetings and that. And he says, "Hey, Charlie, you should come and join the AISE, get on the crane committee." And so that's what got me started.
And how has your involvement progressed over the years since that initial?
Well, I guess the first thing is when, again, most of my work was always focused on my job. And so, and again, well, like one of the things I did when you start having crane symposiums, the big thing I had there was for 10 years, I made up a survey and I'd bring it to the crane conference, the crane symposium, and we'd pass it out and ask for people to fill it out and turn it back in. And what I did and I said, anybody who asks for the results of this, we'll send you the report. But basically the goal was find out where my shop compares to the other shops. And what I find out is usually we're trying to like lead in the pack. And part of it was this Bethlehem Steel Burns Harbor was new. You know, all the cranes were built to a standardization programs. And so everything we did there, and not that we didn't have problems, because we had lots of problems, but as we knocked them out one by one, we made things better. And we passed that information on to everybody. In fact, I've seen companies use the data from our surveys in order to encourage people to use our products too, because we could prove some of that stuff.
How has membership in AIST and AISE benefited you in your career?
It's benefited me, like particularly, you know, I've been a co-chair of, I think it was 21 crane symposiums in a row. Then when I retired from Bethlehem Steel and got hired by a crane company, because of all the symposiums, I had lots of, I call them friends throughout the industry. And when the crane company can't get in a certain place here or there, or they'd call me and say, "Hey, can you do something?" And I always found that when I'd call somebody and say, "Hey, we want to come down there and with the company and see what we can do to help you," and companies always say, "When do you want to come?" You know, so that helped just as a business company with the second company I worked for. So that was very good. The other thing is, I haven't mentioned it, but friends. I've gotten so many wonderful friends throughout the years. I get phone calls from them. Sometimes I get an interest in all their problems. So I always ask, what's going on? What's going on? What's going good? Are you still doing this? I heard it even this morning from Wendell Carter. He knows all about wheels. One of the things I always push on wheels was lubrication. And I've never given up to keep pushing people. Wendell remembers I've said that, you know. So, and I ask at the crane symposium coming this year, there's a guy coming from U.S. Steel, and I've already thought, well, that's one of the things I got to ask him, because we did a study at his plant, and we know that was important for him to do this. How is it working? It's been probably 5 years since I talked to him about it. So my thing was that I enjoy hearing the result. In fact, I enjoy a lot watching people work. It makes me feel good.
And Wendell's the GM of Burns Harbor. Indiana Harbor.
He was the president last year,
right,
of the AIST, and He is a wonderful guy.
And do you think that societies benefit people still in the industry?
I think very much so. I think people, when they come to, especially training symposiums, we're not talking something out of this world. We're talking hard work things that they're out there working, like at Burns Harbor, the 218 cranes. They're all working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They have problems. When you have problems, you can share these problems with other people. You don't know who you're helping. You might very often be helping a guy that's never had that problem before, and all of a sudden that idea strikes him. Yeah, that could be my problem too, and he goes back and takes care of it.
And if you were to recommend a society like AIST or any of the other AIME societies to new graduates, what would you tell them about organizations like that?
I'd say it's important to become a member of them and to go to the monthly, if they have monthly meetings. To one of the things that I think all the chapter members have is scholarships for young people. I would say in the last probably 10, 15 years, this scholarship program has really expanded a lot. And you get a lot of students then being exposed. Everybody always, when you see a steel mill, everybody thinks, oh my goodness, how dangerous it is, or it's just dirty and hot, they're going to kill you there in 5 years if you work there. You're breathing bad stuff. They say all these things, and most of it's just not true. And so more people you expose to the steel mill stuff, and learn about it, and maybe even take tours and see the places, that you get a lot of young people. And so the steel company should be healthy, have a lot of young people, not just old people working for it that die off and things go away then.
So are there any other things that you think the steel industry could do to attract young people?
I think they've been working very hard at doing that. I think that at the show here, having the students come. I think in the magazine, there's always these things about the students. The Iron and Steel magazine, I think those are very helpful to get interest in them. And I know it's to a point of me, like my granddaughter's coming, and my goal is to get her a little more interested in steel. And it might be, and actually, I have 4 granddaughters. The oldest one came 2 years ago, she came to a conference with me. Now she's married. This one is my next oldest. And then my plan is next year I have the next one. And then the year after that, I have the next one. If I'm still healthy and able to do it, I'm going to try and bring them all to the shows. And, there's lots of things she'll learn here, have nothing to do with steel maybe. And that's how it is. When she gets out of college, she's got to decide where she wants to work, what she wants to do. And steel mills could be part of that, So I'm hoping that she gains some things like that this year.
Do any of your sons or daughters work in the steel industry?
No. My son, he's the oldest. When I was at Bethlehem, he worked every summer for a contractor. Now you'll get me started bragging about my son. So he was on a survey team several years when he was in college. He went to the University of Notre Dame. He's an actuary. For the last 10 years, he's been the CEO of a company in Indianapolis. And this past week, the announcement was made that he's retiring as the CEO from the company in August. And they've named his replacement, who is in his organization. It is an employee-owned company. Okay, so, and he's getting the job he always wanted. He's going back to Notre Dame as professor. He's in charge of the actuarial director job there. So, I mean, it's, they didn't come to work in the steel industry other than that. I'll tell you another story about my son, though. I think it's funny. When he was doing these jobs, he'd have to come to work with me in the morning about 5:30. His job started at 7. So did mine. So we get to work at 5:30. He'd sit in my office. He'd go do his job. And his job would get over at 3 o'clock. He'd come back all dirty. And he'd sit in my office at about 5:30. We'd leave, go home. And he'd take a shower. And one time, this is the part I will tell you about. One part, he said, well, one thing I know, when I get a job, I'll get it done in 8 hours. And it wasn't too long ago, he called me up. He had been in 3 airports in one day because he's just like his dad. And he's hardworking, and he's just such a good kid. And how much I was learned from the steel industry, because a lot of the steel industry people that he worked with, I'd see him run into him here, and he'd say, how's he doing? So he did a good job.
So what made working in the steel industry meaningful to you, and what's been your favorite part of it?
I think the best part of it has been solving problems. It seems like most of the time it was just common sense and simple, but sometimes it takes help. Like one of the things in that regard is that when we're in charge of cranes, and you have to modify things, you fix it, and you change it. You got to change it so that it's not going to come back and bug you. Because one time I can remember we modified this piece of equipment. Then we had to buy a replacement. We sent the drawings out. They made it like it was before we replaced it, before we modified it. So it's like, boy, that's a terrible mistake to bring this expensive piece of equipment in here, and it's not what it should be. You've got to modify it like you did the other one. So one of the things that I really enjoyed was getting a draftsman. And then every time we modified stuff, we documented it. So that the next time, the next guy who buys this, he's going to buy what he needs, not a mistake. And also, another thing that I enjoyed about it is the people. That particular guy was a draftsman. He just a super good guy, did a lot of good things for us. And there was an opening inside the plant. He was interested in it, and he ended up getting that job. Well, I could have stopped him from getting that job. I could say, he's too valuable. I would never do that. My thing is, hey, that's a job you want. I'll help you get it, And now I have to figure out a way to do what he was doing, But to me, the people you meet, the things you do, solving problems. Another thing that we had was when we get cables out of shifts of blocks, and we found a simple fix for that. It used to be like in a hot strip mill, you could shut down a crane for 3 turns, 24 hours, making repairs when a cable got out of shift. It's like, holy cow, there's 3. And during that whole time, 24 hours, if the other crane went down, then the mill's down. So it's like, you got to fix these things. So we found easy fixes, and so we made it a standard that this is a problem-solving thing. Before a block goes out, it's got to have this fix done to it, wherever it goes, so we don't ever have that problem again. And so it's like you just continuously improve. You keep making things better and better. And when you know that, this is the way you know it happens. If you start having problems and they're once a week you have a problem, so finally you fix that. And then you don't, the next problems you have, they're once a month. And then you fix that. And next time you fix problems and they're once every 6 months, and you fix that. So that you keep continuously making them more reliable. You make that equipment more reliable. You feel good about knowing, hey, we did that.
Do you have advice that you would give to young leaders in the engineering profession or the steel industry?
The first advice I'd give them is don't be afraid of getting dirty. I hear this complaint so much. My brother, who was in charge of the hot strip mill, he retired, and one of the reasons he retired, he said, all these new young engineers he gets, they want to sit behind a computer all day. They don't want to go out and find out what's going on, get dirty. And so my first advice was really the process for an engineer needs to be in the field, not sitting behind a computer 8 hours a day. That's not the place. If you want to go out there and you know, I can say I worked 37 years solving problems. There's still a whole bunch of them out there. And somebody needs to be out there. And truly, the engineers are the ones that need to do that. When you come to the AISE conferences, I always go to these speeches that you have in the beginning of it.
Yeah, the plenary events, the Brimacombe or the Howe Memorial Lectures.
And I've met like Dr. Chin Zhao.
Yep. From Purdue Northwest.
Purdue Northwest. There's a professor from Indonesia. She's come here. You find out so many things that you didn't know, like using plastics, using plastics as combustible. There's so many things like that that you find out here at these shows that, my goodness, when you find out, like steel mills use scrap. And when you find out that the auto industry, they shred the automobiles. And the funny part I always thought about them was one place I visited in Texas was they found like $1,400 a month in coins inside these shredded vehicles. It's like, who would ever even know that? How did you get the coins when you're shredding it? So it's like so again, back to the engineers, when they come, whatever area they're working on, they also need to learn the other areas. Like I said, I started out electrical. I became very good at mechanical stuff, although I never became an engineer on any of it. I enjoyed solving problems, and I enjoyed seeing things get better.
You mentioned your brother also worked in the steel industry. Did anyone else in your family work?
No, it was just my brother and I were the only ones, but we both, he started 3 years after I did. He was younger. And so I'll tell you a little story about him. So when he came to work, when I started, I was in the plate mill. But then I switched over and got into the hot strip mill. When he came in through the employment office, they thought I was in the plate mill, and they don't want to put brothers together. So they sent him to the hot mill. Well, he ended up being in the hot mill. For a couple years, he worked on my crew. And he was an hourly motor inspector too. He came up the same way I came up. And one thing that the whole time he worked for me, whenever there was extra work that had to be done, or I'd say, hey, you got to get out there and get that done, whatever, I would always say, Sam, get going. And so I pushed him, so he had to work a lot more than anybody else. And one of the reasons I did that was, you know how if somebody thinks you're making it easy on somebody. So he worked for me for a couple of years. Never once did I ever get somebody to say, yeah, I took it easy on him. I never did. So in the end, Sam became the in charge of both electrical and mechanical for the hot strip mill maintenance. For several years there, he was in charge of all that. But then, like I said, the last few years, they were hiring lots of engineers, and he was rather frustrated trying to get them to go out and get dirty and know what's going on. So, and when he died 6 months ago. And when he died, I've never been to a funeral as big as his, and it was made up of all the people that worked with him at the steel mill, including the vice president in charge of the plant. He was there, and they all had, when he told them he was going to retire, they asked him to go down to another one of their plants in Texas was just going up, starting up. If he'd go down there like on a 2-year contract. So he went down there after for a week to look it over, but he decided no, he wants to retire. So he did retire, but he was we rode together sometimes to work. Sam was a really great guy, and I got to tell you this story too. A little embarrassing, but I had a group inside. One of the groups I had was called the 408 department, and it was when the steel mills were in real trouble, and they wanted to save cost. And the union was saying, "Hey, you got to keep the union working." So the company says, "Okay, we will not use certain contractors. We'll use these hourly guys that we really don't need because the production's way down. But we'll have these guys, and we call them the 408 department." So that was one of the departments they gave me to take care of, and I found it was a place where I could go and get into trouble because I would be pressuring people. I wanted to work a little harder and get things done, and I'd spend time with them. I'd make sure I was fair, or at least in my mind I was fair. But one of the things, the way I would do that is like we had a group. They were called welders. Their job was to fix these ladle covers. Now, if you know what a ladle cover is, this steel thing about the size of this table, maybe a third bigger, and it would fit down over top of these 350-ton ladles. Inside was the refractors, but the outside was all steel. And what would happen was they'd get bounced around and boogered up, and they have to go and get welding repairs done. So there was contractors who did that. So they decided through contracting out that 408 department should repair these. So we had to set up a shop, and we would have 3 guys down there supposedly fixing these ladle covers. So my job, I tried to go everywhere all the time and get into trouble wherever I could. Because I'd go down there and where the ladles were going, and I was getting all these complaints. You're driving our costs so high, we can't afford to have you make these repairs. It's just costing too much. And so when I get these complaints, I would go down there and I would look around, and I find out there's no spent welding rods. Who's welding? Nobody's welded. So I'd go get the foreman. You need to get down there and find out what's going on because they're not doing their job. And so, of course, the word gets spread around. Charlie's down there and always harassing those guys. And then, so finally that got abandoned because the price got so high. The mill people found out they could buy new ones instead of repairing the old ones versus repair. And that was, to me, it was a terrible weakness I didn't fix. You know, I should have fixed that. I didn't. So anyway, years later, when that job was all gone, I got a call from my brother because as a salesman, I go and visit my brother too. So I'd go in there and he'd say, "The guys down in the shop, they got something for you." I said, "Oh, okay." And I knew all those guys. I knew all these millwrights because I'd worked a hot mill for 10 years. So I go down there and they're all laughing. And I figure, oh, something's up. So I said, "Sam told me you guys have something for me." And, they're like snickering. And I know something is up. So they pull out this piece of steel about this long. And they told me what happened. They went down to the hot mill where my welding group were working, and he found this piece of steel, and they brought it back, and he called Sam. "Sam, we found something for you." And he told him what it was. He says, "That ain't mine. That's my brother's." So when I went out, he pulled it out and gave it to me. It says, "Totten sucks." And it was done by air arcing on this piece of steel, so it's like, I felt good. I got somebody to do some work. To make that, And I still have that piece of steel, by the way. I still have it. Because, and I told that story at Sam's eulogy, and I got a lot of laughs because from people that worked with Sam, they knew what was going on, and they knew the reputation of the department that they give me to try and shake up. So.
You mentioned your brother at AIST. I think you're also very well known for your wife accompanying you to almost all the conferences. Could you talk about her a little bit?
Well, I have some pictures here. You know, I was in the Army. I went to Korea for 13 months. I met my wife there, and then got transferred to Germany. So I hopped back from Germany, and we got married in the American Embassy. And I always humbly think of my wife that she left her country, South Korea, to come to the United States. She trusted me to do that. So we spent our life together, and we really have so many things to be thankful for. And for me, it's to be thankful for her, and to be thankful now that I have the 3 children and 11 grandchildren. And that's core of my life. You know, if you look at a person's life, you get married, you have children, and life goes on. And then children leave you. And then if a wife leaves you, you're near the end of your life. You know, you're just about there. And so I try to be thankful every day for my life. And I think of my wife many times every day. And I'll tell you one of the things about coming here. She was very famous. She was always here. Mm-hmm. She came with me to Crane Symposium and conferences. She was always here. She loved coming here. You know, we had 3 of these Crane Symposiums outside the United States. We had one in Slovakia, Košice, Slovakia. We had one in Argentina. When we went to Argentina, she was in a wheelchair. She would never have thought of staying, not going. She was just that kind of a woman. She just, like I said, she was just a wonderful wife. There's at home, and I think this happens more since she's gone. There's things I look at that I know when she'd say, I want to do this, I'd say, oh, I don't want to do that. But I do it. And now I look at things and I look at it and I say, oh, she's smart for doing that stuff, you know. And at the time, I never thought she was. But I know that she was also who raised our children. She was a disciplinarian. It wasn't me. She and I would always talk. We know what was going on with every child. So we had that all together. So she was just a great partner for me. And the last 10 years when I was a crane salesman, I drove every place in the United States because she went with me. So we were never separated, ever. So just never at all. And the way she's raised my children, every day, about 4 o'clock, I call my one daughter, lives in Baltimore, and I have to report into her. And this has happened since I had a heart surgery back in, I guess it was 10. I guess it was 10. No, 14. It was 14. And my 2 children who live by Indianapolis said, Daddy, you got to move up here. You're too far away. And so I thought over, because I told you I was born in Marengo, Indiana, and we lived most of the time out in South Bend or Michigan City, Indiana. And my wife wanted to move, so we ended up looking around, and I finagled it and got us to move back to my home County, and that's where we live. And I told her, this is God's country. I ain't leaving here for nothing. So when my kids said, hey, you got to move up north in Indianapolis, and I didn't want to do it. So my arrangement I have with my next door neighbor is I call my daughter every day. She has his phone number. If for some reason she can't get a hold of him, she's got permission to call him and check where's daddy's at. So that's the way, all this was, again, my wife taught our children how to do things. They do check on me, and they ask me if I'm doing things the way I should be doing them, because they know what I should be doing. So, and it just, she really made my life worth living. And now that she's gone, I know where I'm going to be buried, right next to her. It's all arranged. So the last thing I tell you about, we had one of these conventions in Cleveland, and she was in a wheelchair, and I'm pushing her through, going to that dinner, one of the dinners, and now I'm trying to remember his name. Mark stopped me and said, Charlie, let me push your wife. So Mark from the AIST staff, he actually pushed her to our table. I'll never forget that, and so she was in a wheelchair. So she was, but he really was, again, where do you find people like that, friends like that? And it's all because of her, back stories like that go. So, anyway, I still tell myself every day, I am the luckiest guy in this world. I've got wonderful children and grandchildren, and it all goes back to my wife. She was, my granddaughter, my kids, my son especially said, she's got a lot of grandma in her, because grandma was a very stubborn lady, and the kids all knew. Like one of the stories, she was Korean. She learned English, and during many years, she learned a new English word every day. But there were some things she didn't quite understand with humor sometimes. And one of them was my son-in-law said something to his wife in front of us there. He was just joking. And she jumped up. She says, don't you ever do anything to my daughter. I will come and kill you. I don't care what they do to me. And it's all, she didn't understand the joke, but it's like she, when she thought she was in, and they always like, woo, she tells you what she's thinking all the time. So she just, she was very vocal. She said whatever was on her mind, her whole time. And I think that's the way my granddaughter is. Whatever she's thinking about, she says it.
Is there anything else that you'd like to discuss?
No, it's just been I'm very humbled by this, really. All I've ever tried to do is just first of all, do my job as best I know how to do. And being associated with a society here and seeing these crane symposiums and the conferences and just the network and everything, it's been a blessing in my life. I do think about my health and what I can, how much longer I'll be able to enjoy these things, because I do really enjoy them. I do go to the 4 meetings a year with the crane committee. I don't think I've missed one in many, many years. And so part of my activities, when my wife passed away, was to stay busy. And one of the ways I stay busy is coming to these, whatever I do. So it's been a blessing on my life.
Thank you very much. It's really been a great pleasure for us to spend some time with you, and thank you for your willingness to share your story with AIME.
Well, you're welcome. I hope you have a big pen so you can mark out some of the things I've said, but it's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you very much, Charlie.
You're welcome.